You want to support Roland Martin Unfiltered? Be sure to join our Bring the Funk fan club. Every dollar that you give to us supports our daily digital show. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real as Roland Martin Unfiltered. Support the Roland Martin Unfiltered daily digital show by going to RolandMartinUnfiltered.com. You can make this possible. I had a conversation with Tom Steyer today about his run for president, and we talked specifically about what his plans are for African Americans when it comes to housing, education, HBCUs, and also black business. Let's hear what Tom has to say. Tom Steyer, glad to have you here on Roland Martin Unfiltered.
Roland Martin, it's great to be with you. It really is.
All right, let's talk first about the Iowa debacle. Just got to get your thoughts on the fact that here we are 3 days later, and we still don't know for sure what the final results of the Iowa caucus.
Look, this is a dream come true for Donald John Trump. This has been, for anybody who doesn't realize that Trump can get reelected, then they should pay attention to the last 3 days. That started with the Iowa debacle. The next day was the State of the Union. And the next day was the Republican cover-up and sham trial resulting in a 52-48 vote not to remove him from office immediately. He's had a great 3 days. And for every Democrat who's paying attention, you have to realize we need a presidential contender who can beat him, because otherwise we're going to lose.
Well, let's talk about that. We look at the results in Iowa. You did not do so well. What do you attest that to? Was your focus really on that state, or were you looking at some of the other states?
Look, we were the last people to get it into Iowa. It's heavy on organization. We said we'd organize, we'd show up everywhere, and we did. I'm here in New Hampshire right now, Roland, but we can see that whoever's going to be president is going to have to put together a diverse coalition of Democrats. And that specifically means that whoever is going to be the Democratic candidate is going to have to be appealing and speaking directly to the African American community and to the Latino community. And if whoever the candidate is can't do that, then we won't have the kind of diverse coalition in November of 2020 that can beat Mr. Trump. And so I think every single conversation about this election has to start with the fact that the Democratic Party is a very diverse party. It is going to be led in terms of decision-making by communities of color. And that has got to be considered in looking at every single candidate who wants to represent this party.
Well, sounds to me like what you're saying is that with Iowa and New Hampshire being overwhelmingly white, more than 90%, that Iowa and New Hampshire are not representative of the voters across the country, and definitely not the Democratic Party.
Well, let me say this. I believe that voters in New Hampshire have got to be thinking about what I'm talking about, Roland. You and I both know that I'm doing very well in South Carolina. I think I'm in second. I get 24% of the black vote specifically in South Carolina. I'm in third place, I think, in Nevada, but moving up every single week. I do very well with Latinos. And so the question people have got to be asking, and that I want to point out, is I believe that the kind of coalition that I'm putting together in Nevada first, and then specifically in South Carolina, is the kind of coalition that's going to be necessary in November. That in fact, this is going to be a turnout election, in my opinion. Mm-hmm. And if whoever the Democrat is not speaking directly, is not connecting with the African American community and the Latino community, if we don't get the kind of turnout we need, Trump can get reelected. We've got to face that. That's just a fact.
Well, to that point there, when you talk about turnout, I mean, you look at the numbers in Iowa, 170,000 turnout. That was down from 240,000 in 2016. I mean, those were dismal numbers with the number of candidates you actually had in the race.
As I said, if you look at the last 3 days, anyone who doesn't realize that Donald Trump can get reelected isn't paying attention. We need a candidate who can attract a diverse coalition. We need a candidate who can go after Mr. Trump on the economy, Roland. Look, Trump's running on the economy. He says it every single day. He's a big liar, and he's lying about this too. But he says he's a great candidate for the economy and for jobs and for growth. He's lying. But whoever the Democrat is has got to be able to go expose him and expose that lie. Show that actually he was a failed businessman and a fake. And that when it comes to the economy, he's terrible for the American people. Look, I spent 30 years in the private sector. I can take him on this stage. I can go toe to toe. I can take him down. You can't win this with 2 years at McKinsey. You can't win this as a career politician from Washington, D.C. To beat him on the economy, you actually have to know the economy, and you have to go after him and be comfortable and happy to go toe to toe with him and expose him. And that's what I can do. We've got to do that, Roland, or we can't win.
He often talks about, obviously, low unemployment. He's always touting lowest on record African-American unemployment. But one of the issues that I keep raising is that when you look at some of the other factors out there, he doesn't want to talk about. He touted in the State of the Union the unemployment rate when it comes to black youth. I keep making the point also that you hear him say nothing about the low black home ownership rate. And so in terms of, what specifically is your agenda when we talk about home ownership among African Americans? That's where most Americans are getting their wealth creation from. Let's talk about that. Let's talk about some of those very specific things that African Americans are talking about. And so what is your housing plan specifically to address black home ownership at its lowest rate since 1968 when the Fair Housing Act was passed?
Yes. So, Roland, let's take a step backward, because I think, as you know, I believe that policy has got to come out of narrative and history and truth. And as you know, we don't need to get into it right now, but I'm somebody who believes in two things: reparations. I'm for reparations. And two, I would start a commission on race the first day of my presidency to retell the more than 400 years of the African American experience in the United States, to get into the legalized constitutional injustice, discrimination, and cruelty, but also into the contribution of the black community over centuries, not just in building the United States, but in leading the United States from a moral standpoint. But let's talk for a second about home ownership. And let me talk for a second. First, let me start with what I've been doing. I don't know if you know this, Roland, but my wife and I started a nonprofit community bank 15 years ago. We didn't do it because I was running for president. We did it because we could see that banks in the United States redlined communities and didn't support specific people. So it's a mission-driven bank. And its mission is economic justice, environmental sustainability, support businesses owned by women and people of color. Where regular banks redline, that's where we go. If they won't do it, we will do it. It's over $1 billion now in terms of housing. In the last 3 years, we've supported over 8,500 affordable housing units. So I have a history specifically of going into black communities with a bank that's now over $1 billion, started from scratch, where we put in all the money. It'll never come back. It was put in a way that it can only be used to make more loans or be given away. And this bank is specifically dedicated to going into underserved communities, specifically black communities in our home state of California, in Oregon, and in Washington. But let's talk for a second about home ownership and why African-American home ownership is historically low, and why black people have been cut out from the basic engine of American family wealth generation, which is called home ownership through mortgage. You buy a house, you take out a big loan called a mortgage, you pay down the loan, the house appreciates in value, presto, family wealth. That is the basic way Americans have built their family wealth for generations. And it's been, African-American families have been prevented from doing it because banks have refused to lend in African-American communities, called redlining. And there's a history of it. I've actually studied it. I've gone and looked to see what it looks like. It was absolutely, they were unapologetic and unashamed. They did it openly. So what would I do to address this? If you look at our housing plan, We have 7 million too few affordable housing units in the country. We can talk about how we're going to build those, and I have a plan for it. But in terms of African-American home ownership, we're talking about, and we need to, this is why we need to do a solution-based commission on race. I'm talking about subsidized down payments for families that have been shut out because of discrimination and racial prejudice, have been shut out of the housing market for generations. We're talking about giving specific assistance to redress something that has been a historic injustice of dramatic proportion.
But your critics would say that's a quota. Agree or disagree? How do you respond to your critics who would say, hey, that's a quota? Yes, it's a race-based remedy.
Okay, let me say this. Roland, you and I both know that in virtually every policy area in the United States, there is an unspoken, huge racial issue. Mm-hmm. Housing, yes. There's a huge racial issue, which is black people have been discriminated against from getting home mortgages for generations. Education, yes. Criminal justice, yes. So let's be clear. We're going to take race explicitly into consideration to redress racial injustice that explicitly disadvantaged and discriminated against black people. I'm not apologetic about it. Something wrong was done. That's why I want this commission to go through the facts of the last 400 plus years. Something wrong was done. Multiple wrongs were done. We didn't just get here. People did things that were wrong, like redlining black communities and refusing to make mortgages in them. Yeah, we didn't just get here. We're talking about reparations as in repairing damage done. Tell the story, start with truth, solution-based to talk about how do we repair it, and then how do we move on? If we don't tell the truth and repair it, how do we move on? How do we be the just society that we claim we want to be or that we claim that we are? So yes, I'm not scared of saying we're going to take race explicitly into consideration because race has been taken explicitly into consideration for hundreds of years.
When you mention education, let's talk about that. Obviously, we have many presidents who've said they wanted to be the education president. When we still look at the numbers in terms of black student achievement compared to white students, there's still a huge problem there. There are people like me who are supporters of school choice, who believe in charter schools. I believe that there should be multiple options for parents, not just a sole option. I don't believe there's a panacea. I don't believe there's one way to educate a child. And so what does your education plan look like, specifically when we talk about African Americans?
So when we think about education, Roland, let me give you some background on me and some background about how I think about it, and then let me give you the policies. So first of all, my mom taught in the public schools in New York City. After she retired as a teacher in the public schools, she taught prisoners at the Brooklyn House of Detention. My brother Jim, who's a year older than me, graduated early from high school so he could go to work in the New York public schools with my mom before he went off to college. He has been an advocate for at-risk children as a career, and he's older than I am. So I have been hearing forever on the idea about education, specifically of African Americans, as a means not just for prosperity and success, but also for mobility and justice. And the other thing I've been hearing since it seems like I was in the cradle is that you can't get to kids early enough. I mean, I'm for universal preschool. I'm for subsidized childcare because I know two things. One, that the number one statistic correlated with success in America, however you define success, is third grade reading comprehension. So I know you don't get third grade reading comprehension in the third grade. You have to be way early, but that where you are at that point is going to determine an enormous amount about the rest of your life. And if there's one thing that we need to do above all, it's to break this school to prison pipeline. We need to be early. We need to spend whatever it takes really to support those kids as early as possible to get them in a position to succeed. So when you ask me what's my policy is to be early. My policy is we spend at a federal level $70 billion on education. And at a federal level, we spend over $700 billion on defense. And that number has gone up by more than $100 billion since Donald Trump became president. So the increase in the defense budget in the last 3 years is more than the total budget for education at the federal level. Mm-hmm. And I look at education, that is our future economic prosperity. That's our future success, because we depend on the productivity and excellence of American citizens to succeed. But also, if we're not devoting the money and resources to give specifically African-American kids a chance to live up to their potential, to go wherever their talent and ambition and work will take them, then we are legislating inequality for a generation. Absolutely unacceptable. So my point on this is we have to be really early, and we have to change our priorities, not just in terms of supporting teachers, paying them better, also supporting them much more broadly and supporting the kids much more broadly, not just with teachers, but with mental health professionals, with nurses, with librarians. The payoff for this in justice and in success is so dramatic for our society. It proves to me exactly what I was trying to say to you earlier. Yeah, Mr. Trump gives tax breaks to rich people and big corporations, and that's his way of juicing the economy. It's a total fraud. It's a short-term fix. It's a sugar high. It's destructive in the long term. Not just that. He doesn't do what it takes to really succeed as a society, which is to invest educationally in young people and to make sure that we're taking race into account to redress generations of underspending on Black kids.
Well, what you also are seeing is, frankly, a Secretary of Education a federal judge had to admonish her when it came to ignoring an order as it related to the people who are trying to pay back loans from these for-profit colleges. I mean, the Obama administration really went hard after for-profit colleges. The Trump administration has let them off the hook and allowed them to run rampant. I guess when you have Trump University, that's exactly how you operate. So that should be no shock to people. And so that's also one of the issues. He also touts, first of all, he lied when he gave a speech saying how he saved HBCUs. That's a flat out lie. And so let's talk about historically Black colleges and universities in terms of your plan when it comes to assisting those HBCUs.
So, Roland, I hope you know, but if you don't, I'm about to tell you anyway, so you don't have to worry about it, that I have a plan to support HBCUs at a level that is multiples of what has ever been done or what's ever been proposed. Mm-hmm. And again, I believe policy comes out of narrative. So let's just remember, the historically Black colleges and universities were created because it's illegal for Black kids to go to the mainline colleges and universities. And so they were created, some of them before the Civil War, to be the one ladder to success down south for Black kids who had ambition and drive and talent. And they've worked. They've produced over half the Black generals and doctors and teachers and judges and engineers. And they're dramatically underfunded. They have high tuitions because they don't have big endowments. They have high tuitions because federal funding has gone down by 42%. I'm talking about putting $125 billion into the HBCUs over 10 years. I'm talking about rebuilding, reviving, growing the whole system because they're there for a good reason. They've worked. They're incredibly important to the kids, but they're also incredibly important to the communities where the institutions are located. It's a huge success story and is being allowed to starve to death. Mr. Trump talks about how beneficent he has been to the HBCUs. We're talking about spending on an annual basis a one-time $35 billion move to get them revived, rebuilt, and tuitions down, and then $10 billion a year to make sure that we're growing a system that has true impacts, true growth, true strength, and really is built into the communities in a gigantic way. He's talking about, if my numbers aren't wrong, $386 million. We're talking about 30 times that on a going-in basis and 100 times that on a one-time basis. So really what we're talking about in terms of HBCUs, I was talking to you about reparations, repairing the damage, looking at history to tell the story of what happened, and then having a solution based on that history to repair what happened and to go forward justly together. That's my plan on the HBCUs, and it's just an example, Roland.
When we look at also black business, huge issue, the housing foreclosure crisis that took place beginning really in 2007 exacerbated that. Remember in 2014, the Wall Street Journal had an article that talked about $23.09 billion in small business loans being handed out. The previous year, African Americans only got 385 million of those loans. There was some effort trying to fix that as well. That also is an issue. I've talked with business organizations. When Donald Trump came into the White House, he returned to bundling. First of all, Obama's folks were trying to break up a lot of these large contracts to allow for African American businesses and other minority businesses to be able to compete for those. Trump came back, put them together, so really only the large companies could actually go after those dollars. You look at the federal pension fund. It's a $1 trillion plan. BlackRock controls more than 50 or 60% of that. They wrote the rules for it. African Americans are only managing, my understanding, about 100 million or so of that $1 trillion. But if you look at the wealth of African Americans, it's really the public workspace. And so I've been saying that that's also inequality there. You've got African American money managers out there who should be a part of that $1 trillion pension plan. And so as someone with obviously a business background, we look at the 2.6 million black-owned businesses in America. 2.5 million only have one employee. They're doing $54,000 in annual revenue. And so Trump touts the increase in black-owned businesses, but they're actually doing half of the revenue they were actually doing when we had 700,000 fewer black-owned businesses. So let's talk about black commerce, black-owned businesses. And so I mentioned 3 or 4 things there. Speak on those issues and sort of how you see what does a Steyer presidency look like when it comes to really providing serious and real economic opportunities for black-owned businesses.
So, Roland, I told you, we started a bank 15 years ago. Mm-hmm. A mission to support businesses owned by women, black people, and Latinos, because the mainstream institutional bank world was shutting those people out. We were trying to redress directly in the marketplace the kind of injustice and prejudice you're describing. And as president, I would want to have that kind of community bank in every community to make sure that it was possible. Look, the same is true. The numbers you're talking about are true in venture capital as well. That all of the venture money goes to white males. It's shockingly low numbers of women, of black people, of Latinos. Shocking numbers that are just like 2%. I was in Las Vegas last week, and I was talking to a group of African Americans, and a 75-year-old gentleman was irate that they had just rebuilt. They just built Raider Stadium. You know, the Raiders moved from Oakland to Las Vegas. They just had this multi-billion-dollar construction site.
Taxpayer financed welfare for rich billionaires. Yep. Yes,
1% of the construction dollars went to black-owned firms. 1%. And he said, "What do you do?" I say, "Look, you were asking me about quotas, Roland. Well, let me make a point. This is the old boy network at work.
Right.
And so you're asking me about quotas. This is a 99% quota. It's just not called a quota. If you don't call it a quota, all of a sudden it's okay. But what we're looking at, I'm telling you, I want to put new and different people in charge. I'm for a living wage. I mean, we can talk about that, what I'm willing to do to fight for a living wage, fight back against corporations that are screwing working people. I love to do it. But there's something else. I want new people in charge of organizations in terms of power and money.
Look, so I'll tell you this, Tom. I'll tell you this here.
Heck yes. There's a quota right now. It's just not called a quota. It's called.
But here's the deal. I'll give you this one. This actually, look. I sat in the Treasury Department during the Obama presidency, And I was told point blank, we're in a private lunchroom. I was told point blank that firms led by black people and other people of color outperform white firms on the management of TARP funds. I then said, okay, does that mean they now going to be able to manage more money? And nobody said anything. And I said, I don't understand this. If you outperform other people, where I come from, you should then be able to manage more dollars. And I was very frustrated, even with the Obama administration, by saying, hey, you're over the Treasury Department. It shares along with the White House. This is a perfect example of black firms and other minority firms busting their butt and doing better and still not being able to get access to more dollars. And that just made no sense to me.
Roland, I'm telling you, people want to use the Q word, quota, if African Americans move ahead. They never use the Q word when it comes to white control of power and money.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all we're talking about here. And we're talking about an old boy network that is ensconced and that is deliberate and that has got to be broken up and called out. That's what I'm saying is, look, I don't mean to be funny, but good grief, in virtually every policy area in the United States, there is a huge unspoken racial aspect to it that people won't talk about, except to kind of try and denigrate black people for trying to get ahead, for pushing for change, that somehow that's unacceptable. And I don't even understand the logic, but it's a definite attack. That's what quota is. Quota is like, you're getting something you don't deserve. That's the argument for quotas. And you're not only are you not getting something you deserve, other people are getting stuff they don't deserve. That's really what's going on here. If we don't talk about race, if we don't do a formal commission on race, how does this ever come out? Because how do we ever get to a point where people realize we need these solutions? Something has been done that was wrong. And if we're going to actually move forward, you have to tell the story. I mean, Roland, one of the things that I've always been inspired by was the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa under Nelson Mandela and Bishop Tutu. But it was tell the truth. It starts with truth. You don't get to reconciliation without going through truth.
But here's the deal, though. But I agree with you 100%. But you know what, though? They had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. That was important. But one of the issues that South Africa is still dealing with is the fact that whites make up 9% of South Africa and own 72% of the land. Black South Africans are still dealing with the history, the legacy, yes, of that white supremacy. And the reality is, in this country, we don't like to use the phrase white supremacy. Even if you say white privilege, here's the problem I have with white privilege. People think white privilege, frankly, Tom, are guys like you with money. And I say, no, y'all don't understand. You could be broke and have white privilege, but it's that word privilege. I just think that in this country, people are running away from these issues. But I got to ask you this here, because here's also what I think is a fundamental issue right now. And I've been saying this for 10 years and love to get your thoughts on this. I believe that Donald Trump, I've been saying for 10 years that we're living in this world of white fear and white minority resistance of where we're going, of the demographic changes. I believe, Tom, that Donald Trump is pressing the buttons of that white fear. And when you look at what's happening here, I believe there is a fear of the demographic changes. Not with Latinos, by 2043, a nation will be majority people of color. And I think that's what's driving a lot of this angst. People, all the media said, oh, economic anxiety. Hell, black folks have economic anxiety, but I really think it's just this fear, this fear of the nation changing and being black. I have a different view of the flag and the national anthem than, frankly, a lot of people who were raised who were white. And so when you hear our values are changing, what it means to be America is changing, what they're really saying is we no longer going to have a country that's seen through the eyes, the prism of largely white men. And that is what is freaking people out. And Trump is seen as their savior. Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Roland, is there any doubt? Of course you're right. Are you kidding me? What do you think immigration's really about? It's fear of non-white people coming to the United States. That's what Trump's arguing about. This is racism by a different word. He's not talking about anti-immigration. He's talking about anti-immigration by non-white people. As I like to say, there's no wall on the Canadian border. So, of course that's true. But let me say this, Roland. I'm from a minority state right now called California.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's great. That's where we're going. Great. In fact, this is the United States. This is the Democratic Party. I'm going to have to go, but I want to end where I started, which is this. This is not only the future, this is the now. This is where we are. As a party, we have to embrace exactly what you just said and recognize it's great. That's who we are. We're better for it. We're a better country. We'll be more just. Our diversity, in fact, will be a cause for celebration. Getting past this white supremacy is great. And that's what I'm running on. I'm saying, I'm sitting here literally going, if we don't embrace what you said, if we don't embrace the diversity of America and the diversity of the Democratic Party, we're going to lose. If we don't take Trump on directly on this issue, beat him on the economy, show up, embrace our diversity, everybody show up together to beat back what he's saying, we're going to lose. And that's exactly what I'm running on. I wholeheartedly agree with what you're saying, and I think it's fantastic. That's where I am.
Tom Steyer, I appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Roland Martin, thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate you.
All right, folks, back to our Roland Martin Unfiltered video in just one moment. All right, folks, join Dr. Jackie Hood Martin as she engages others to think like a leader. Are you looking to enhance your leadership or that of your team in 2020? Well, you can join her newest online course and mastermind group, How Successful People Think. She'll be your guide as you learn timeless leadership principles to apply to daily living. The offer expires February 28th. To register, go to www.livetolead.com/Leesburg. It's LIVE number 2, LEAD.com/Leesburg. Now back to your Roland Martin Unfiltered video. You want to check out Roland Martin Unfiltered? YouTube.com/Roland S. Martin. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. There's only one daily digital show out here that keeps it black and keep it real. It's Roland Martin Unfiltered. See that name right there? Roland Martin Unfiltered. Like, share, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. That's youtube.com/Roland S. Martin. And don't forget to turn on your notifications so when we go live, you'll know it.